Today I want to talk about deploying an API on Mantl and then putting that API behind the Kong API Gateway service. This is based on the example application that Langston put together for Mantl, the Mantl 0.6 release. You can find all the instructions in the examples Kong directory in the Mantl project. Okay, let's get started. First, we're going to take a quick look at the API we're going to deploy. It's a very simple API written in Golang. It has two endpoints. The first is the health endpoint, and all that is there for is so that Marathon can properly check the health of the application. The second endpoint is the hello endpoint, and all it does is echo a message with the name that you pass in. As I mentioned, we're going to be deploying this API via Marathon. So let's take a look at the Marathon JSON. We're going to name the application hello-API. I've already built a Docker container, so this is where that is specified. I'm going to run the application on port 4010 on the host. And one other note is I'm explicitly disabling the traffic load balancing for this application. The reason I'm doing this is because we're actually going to use traffic to load balance the Kong API gateway itself in a later step. And finally, here's where the health check is defined. It's going to hit that /health endpoint that we just looked at and report if the application is up and running or not. So let's go ahead and actually deploy our API. I have a simple curl command that will post the API JSON to Marathon for deployment. I'm using environment variables to set my credentials and the IP of my control node. Let's go ahead and run this. And you can see we get back the response from Marathon. If we go ahead and take a look, we can see that Hello API is deploying, and hopefully it will become healthy in the next moment or two. And there we go. Hello API is running and is healthy. We can see it's running on worker 003 and it's listening on port 4010. Okay, so the next step is to deploy Kong itself. I'm going to show you a simple bash script that is used to install Kong and its dependencies. This can be found in the Mantl project in the examples Kong directory. There's a couple things to note in this script. Kong is dependent on Cassandra, so we're going to actually deploy Cassandra as a Mesos framework using Mantl API with this command here. We're going to wait a while for it to become healthy, and then we're going to install Kong itself. We're also deploying Kong directly into Marathon. So let's go ahead and run the deployment. Let's see, we're installing Cassandra. And now that was successful, but we're going to have to wait a few moments for Cassandra to come online and get healthy. Okay, you can see our deployment script finished. We installed Cassandra, and then we went ahead and installed Kong directly into Marathon. We can take a look at that. If we go back to the Marathon UI, we can see that the Cassandra framework is running and is healthy, and we also have Kong running here. Let's take a look at the Kong app. You can see it's listening on two different ports. The first port is the API gateway port, and the second port is the port where Kong's administration API lives. We're going to use the API gateway port later. For now, we're going to start with the Kong administration API. What we need to do is we need to register our simple hello API within Kong. So now we just need to register our API into Kong. I have a simple curl command that's going to do that for us. I am pointing it to the 003 node where Kong is running, as well as the administration API port. I'm giving our API a name. I'm specifying the URL it's available at. You'll notice it's automatically available at hello-api.service.console, and that's thanks to our built-in service discovery in Mantl. And the port it's listening on 4010, which I set up earlier. And finally, I'm going to mount this API underneath a /hello endpoint. Let's go ahead and run this command. I have to do this within the cluster because the administration API port is not going to be available through the firewall on most installations. Okay, so that worked. We have a 201 status. We can see that Kong responded with a little information about our newly registered API, the upstream URL, the request path, and some identification information. Now that the API is registered within Kong, we should be able to access it. Because Kong is deployed via Marathon, it's automatically discovered by the traffic load balancer and made available externally over port 80. In this example, the domain name we see here is applicable to my cluster. It's obviously going to be different depending on the domain you use to set up your cluster and whether or not you have DNS active. Let's go ahead and run this. So there you see Kong is proxying to our API running in Marathon and returning the results. It's mounted at /hello, and you can see Kong is serving it correctly. Okay, that's great. We have our API installed and running in our cluster. We have it running behind Kong. Kong is basically acting as a proxy for our API. But let's take advantage of some of the features in Kong itself to showcase why you would want to do this. Let's secure our API. Right now, our API is open to the world. Anyone can access /hello and get a friendly message back. We want to lock this down. So let's turn on API authentication for our application. Again, I have another curl command. We're going to, again, talk to the Kong administration API, and we're going to install a plugin called KeyAuth, which basically enables API token authentication. We'll run it in the cluster again, and we again have a successful message. Kong is just giving us back some data about the current operation. We enabled KeyAuth authentication on this API. Let's see what happens when I try to access the API now. I'm going to use the same command I used just a moment ago before I installed the auth plugin. In this case, you'll see we get a 401 unauthorized error. We can see Kong is returning the message saying that no API key is found in the headers, body, or query string. So essentially, with a single command, we installed a plugin that allowed us to secure our API from the public. I'm not going to go through the process of actually creating API keys and so forth. You can do it through various API calls against the Kong administration API. There's a lot more you can do with Kong, and I encourage you to take a look. Remember, you can find the Kong example in the Mantl project in the examples Kong directory, so you can try this out on your own cluster.